I stood on my balcony watching the flashing red and blue lights swallow my daughter whole. She screamed for me, begging her daddy to save her from the FBI agents dragging her across the pavement. But I did not move. I did not call my lawyer. I simply took a sip of my bourbon and touched the small black earbud in my left ear. The very gift she had given me for my 65th birthday just 72 hours earlier. She thought she was giving me a gadget to make me look cool. She did not know she was handing me the weapon that would destroy her boyfriend's criminal empire and teach her the hardest lesson of her life. Before I tell you how a pair of headphones took down a cartel, let me know where you are listening from in the comments. Hit subscribe if you believe that sometimes tough love is the only way to save the ones you love. The Port of Seattle never sleeps. My office is essentially a glass box suspended above a chaotic symphony of crashing shipping containers and screaming forklifts. It smells of diesel and salt water, a scent that has clung to my skin for 40 years. On my desk sat a small box wrapped in shiny silver paper that looked out of place among the manifests and shipping logs. It was my 65th birthday. Most men my age are planning retirement parties, but I was just trying to get through a shift without a migraine. My phone buzzed on the desk, vibrating against the wood. It was a FaceTime request from Beatrice. I wiped the grease from my hands onto my work pants and answered. Her face filled the screen, beaming with that innocent smile that always made me forget for a split second that she was dating a shark. "Happy birthday, Daddy," she squealed, the audio distorting slightly over the bad connection. Open it now." I fumbled with the wrapping paper, my fingers stiff from the damp morning air. Inside was a sleek black case. No logo, no brand name. Just smooth, matte black plastic that felt strangely cold. I popped the lid open. 2 earbuds sat inside, looking like jagged pieces of obsidian. "They are a prototype," Beatrice explained, her voice breathless with excitement. "Dominic knows some developers in Silicon Valley. These are worth $2,000, but he wanted you to have them. He says you need to look cool at work." I forced a smile. "Thank Dominic for me," I said, though the name tasted like bile in my throat. I picked one up. It was heavy. Too heavy for consumer electronics. It felt dense, like it was packed with lead instead of speakers. I put the left one in my ear. Immediately, the roar of the port vanished. It was not just noise cancellation. It was absolute, unnatural silence. Then, a low, thrumming pressure built up against my eardrum, a frequency so high it made my teeth ache. I have handled military-grade hardware in my past life, and I knew instantly that this was not a music device. It felt like something was scanning me from the inside out. The crash of ceramic shattering against concrete echoed through the warehouse like a gunshot. I jumped and spun around, my hand instinctively going to the device in my ear. Sergeant Kowalski was standing 10 feet away, frozen like a statue. His coffee mug lay in jagged pieces at his feet, steaming brown liquid pooling around his heavy work boots. But he did not seem to notice. His eyes were wide, fixed on the side of my head, with a look of recognition and absolute terror that I had not seen since he first came back from his tour in Kandahar. "Take it out," I said. "Take it out right now." His voice was not a request. It was a command born from muscle memory and trauma. Before I could ask what was wrong, he lunged forward, grabbing my arm with a grip that bruised. He dragged me into the narrow shadow between 2 towering stacks of shipping containers, away from the security cameras and the prying eyes of the other shift workers. His breathing was ragged, as if the air in the warehouse had suddenly turned into sand. "You need to tell me exactly where you got that device, George," he hissed, pressing his back against the cold steel of the container. I told him it was a birthday gift from my daughter, a prototype from her boyfriend. Kowalski let out a short, bitter laugh that had no humor in it. A prototype, he repeated, shaking his head. That is a Ghost Link Mark IV. We used to recover these from high-value targets in the mountains. It is not an audio device, George. It is a targeting system. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. It uses bone conduction, not just to transmit sound, but to map the resonance of your skull. It creates a biometric profile of the wearer in real time. But that is not the worst part. It emits a passive, low-frequency signal used to guide autonomous suicide drones to a specific target without using GPS. If you are wearing that, you are not just listening to music. You are painting a bullseye on your own head. Or you are being used as a human key to bypass a biometric lock that requires a living host. My stomach turned over. I thought of Beatrice's smile when she handed me the box. I thought of Dominic's insistence that I wear them at work. Call the police, Kowalski said, his hand trembling as he reached for his phone. We need to call the bomb squad and the FBI right now. I grabbed his wrist, stopping him. The realization hit me harder than a physical blow. If this was military-grade tech, Dominic was not just a white-collar criminal. He was something much worse. And Beatrice was right in the middle of it. If we call the cops now, my daughter goes to federal prison for treason, or she gets killed to tie up loose ends, I said, my voice steady despite the fear rising in my throat. Put the phone away, Kowalski. I am not going to report this. I am going to use it. I looked at the black piece of plastic in my palm, no longer seeing a gift, but a weapon. That was the moment the old George died, the tired warehouse manager who just wanted a quiet retirement. 3 days later, as I watched the SWAT team kick down my front door, I would wonder if I made the right choice. But in that dark alley between the shipping containers, I only knew one thing. I was going to hunt them down. The private elevator doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a world that I had only ever seen in magazines. Dominic's penthouse was a sprawling expanse of white marble and floor-to-ceiling glass that looked out over the glittering skyline of Seattle. It was beautiful and cold, just like the man who owned it. I stepped out onto the plush carpet, feeling acutely aware of my scuffed work boots and the fraying cuffs of my jacket. The air inside smelled of expensive leather and ozone, a sharp contrast to the diesel and brine that seemed to follow me everywhere I went. Dominic was waiting for me, standing by a fireplace that probably cost more than my annual pension. He was wearing a midnight blue velvet smoking jacket that shimmered under the recessed lighting. When he saw me, he flashed a smile that displayed perfect white teeth, but his eyes remained dead. "George," he boomed, walking over with arms wide open, as if we were old friends. "So glad you could make it." He stopped just short of hugging me, instead clapping a hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm but patronizing, like a master patting a loyal dog. "Can I get you a drink?" he asked, steering me toward a bar cart that was stocked with bottles I could never afford. I watched him work. He picked up a bottle of red wine from the bottom shelf. I recognized the label immediately. It was a generic table wine, the kind you buy at a gas station for $7. He poured a generous amount into a glass for me, then, without missing a beat, poured himself and Beatrice a glass from a dusty bottle of vintage French Bordeaux that had been sitting open on the counter. He handed me the cheap wine, his manicured fingers brushing against my calloused ones. "You know, Beatrice and I were just talking about you, George. It is truly admirable what you do down there at the docks. Physical labor. Real honest sweat. He took a sip of his $1,000 wine and swirled it around, looking at me over the rim of the glass. Most men your age have given up, but you are still out there, hauling crates and driving forklifts in the rain. It is so quaint. His voice dripped with a sickening sweetness, a condescension so thick I could practically taste it. He was not complimenting my work ethic. He was reminding me of my place. To him, I was not a father or a veteran or a manager. I was a mule, a beast of burden to be used until my back broke and then discarded. I took a sip of the vinegar he called wine and forced a grateful nod, playing the part of the simple, grateful old man. "It keeps me busy," I said, keeping my voice low and humble. Dominic chuckled, moving closer until he was invading my personal space. "Exactly," he said. "And that access you have, George, it is unique. Not many people understand the intricate rhythms of the supply chain like you do. Systems are so fragile, aren't they? One missed signature, one open gate, and everything changes." He stared at me then, not with affection, but with the cold calculation of a butcher eyeing a side of beef, trying to decide exactly where to make the cut. Beatrice floated over, hooking her arm through his, oblivious to the shark she was clinging to. She looked at him with adoration, but I looked at him and saw a man who was already calculating exactly how much my life was worth. Beatrice pulled me away from the living room, her grip on my arm surprisingly strong. She dragged me into the kitchen, a sterile expanse of stainless steel and cold marble that felt more like an operating theater than a place to cook a meal. As soon as the heavy swinging door closed, blocking out the sound of Dominic's smooth jazz playlist, her smile vanished. The mask of the happy hostess dropped, and beneath it I saw a desperate woman who looked exhausted and terrified. "Daddy, please listen to me," she whispered, leaning against the granite island. "Dominic is under a lot of pressure right now. This shipment is not just electronics. It is the deal that is going to secure our future. If this goes through, we can finally move to Europe like we always talked about. We can get married. But we need your help. The Port Authority is holding the container in Zone 4 because of a paperwork error. They just need a manager's override signature to release it. You have that clearance. You can sign it tomorrow morning." I looked at her, at the frantic energy in her eyes. "Beatrice," I said, keeping my voice calm, "you are asking me to bypass federal inspection protocols. If I sign that release without verifying the cargo, I am committing a felony. If there is nothing wrong with the shipment, why can Dominic not wait for the standard review? Why does it have to be me?" She pushed herself off the counter, her face twisting into an ugly expression of resentment. "Why do you always have to be so difficult?" she snapped. "Why can you never just be happy for me? My whole life you have been like this. Always rules, always safety. You never took a risk, and that is why you are still rotting in that warehouse while men like Dominic run the world. You are jealous of him, aren't you? You are jealous because he is giving me the life you never could." Her words were designed to hurt, to cut deep into the insecurities of a father who had raised a daughter alone on a blue-collar wage. But I did not feel anger. I felt a cold, sinking dread. These were not Beatrice's words. My daughter was kind. She was empathetic. This was Dominic speaking through her. She was parroting his manipulation, his worldview. She had been systematically broken down and rebuilt into a tool for his ambition. She took a step closer, her voice trembling, now shifting from anger to guilt. Mom would have wanted me to be happy, Daddy. She would not have stood in my way. If you love me, you will do this one thing. Just one signature. Do not ruin my life just because you are too stubborn to bend a rule. I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the dilated pupils, the slight tremor in her hands. She was not just in love. She was addicted to the validation he gave her and terrified of losing it. If I said no now, she would cut me off completely, and I would lose the ability to protect her. I had to play the game. I had to let her believe she had won. I let my shoulders slump, feigning defeat. "Okay, Beatrice," I said softly. "I will look at the papers tomorrow. Just tell Dominic I will handle it." She hugged me then, but her embrace felt cold. She was hugging the signature, not her father. Dominic came back into the kitchen, holding the black charging case like it was a holy relic. He did not ask if I wanted to try them. He simply opened the lid and held it out to me. The gesture was commanding, not generous. "Put them on, George," he said. His eyes locked on mine. "I want you to hear the noise cancellation. It is revolutionary." Beatrice stood behind him, wringing her hands nervously, waiting for my reaction. I knew I had no choice. If I refused, he would get suspicious. I reached out and took the cold black buds from the case. They felt heavy in my palm, dense with the military-grade circuitry I had seen under my microscope. I placed them in my ears. Instantly, the hum of the refrigerator and the distant city traffic vanished. The silence was absolute and unnatural, like being submerged in deep water. Then came the pressure, a low-frequency vibration that started in my jaw and radiated up into my skull. It was not sound, it was a scan. I watched Dominic lift his iPad Pro. He tapped the screen, and the pressure in my ears increased. "How does that feel?" he asked, his voice sounding muffled and distant, even though he was standing 3 feet away. I turned my head slightly, pretending to look out at the panoramic view of the city night. But my focus was on the reflection in the darkened floor-to-ceiling glass. It acted like a perfect black mirror. I could see Dominic's iPad screen clearly. There was no music player open, no album art. Instead, there was a rotating, three-dimensional wireframe model of a human skull. My skull. A series of green data points were rapidly mapping the unique acoustic geometry of my ear canals. He was not testing audio quality. He was harvesting my biometric signature. "Say something," Dominic commanded. "Read the label on that wine bottle. I need to check the vocal clarity." I picked up the cheap bottle of red wine he had poured for me earlier. I knew exactly what was happening. To bypass the Port Authority's Level 4 security grid, you needed a voice print authentication that matched a living host. A recording would not work, but a real-time synthesizer calibrated to my bone structure would. I had to play the part of the impressed old man while he stole my identity right in front of my face. "This is a 2018 Merlot," I said, my voice reverberating strangely inside my own head. In the reflection, I saw the wireframe on his screen pulse red. A progress bar flashed across the bottom. Biometric handshake complete. Dominic swiped the screen, clearing the data before I could turn back around. He smiled a genuine smile of triumph this time. "Incredible, isn't it?" he asked, taking the earbuds back from me. "It sounds like you were standing right in the recording booth." I forced myself to widen my eyes in wonder. "That is amazing, Dominic," I said. "I have never heard anything like it. It is so clear." It felt like the band was in the room. He patted my shoulder, satisfied that his deception was successful. He thought he was looking at a foolish old dock worker who was impressed by a fancy toy. He did not know that I had memorized the IP address that flashed in the corner of his screen just before he closed the app. He had my voice, but now I had a back door into his entire digital life. The door to my rental unit clicked shut behind me, sealing out the damp Seattle night. I did not turn on the main lights. I did not want to alert anyone watching from the street that I was awake. I walked straight to the corner of the bedroom where an old roll-top desk sat covered in a dust sheet. To the landlady, I was just a hobbyist who fixed old radios. But beneath that sheet lay the remnants of a career I had buried decades ago. I pulled back the canvas and switched on the articulated desk lamp, swinging the magnifying loop into position. The harsh white light illuminated my workspace. It was time to see what was truly inside the Trojan horse my daughter had handed me. I sat down and put on a pair of nitrile gloves. I placed the black earbud on the anti-static mat. Under the magnification of the loop, the device looked less like a consumer product and more like a sealed weapon. There were no visible screws, no seams. It was ultrasonically welded shut, designed to break if anyone tried to force it open. But I had opened Russian guidance chips with a toothpick in a sandstorm. This was child's play. I picked up a ceramic scalpel, the blade so fine it was almost invisible to the naked eye. I did not cut. I applied pressure to the microscopic gap between the charging contact and the outer shell. I held my breath. One slip, and I would sever the ribbon cable inside, rendering the device useless and alerting Dominic that I had tampered with it. With a soft, almost imperceptible pop, the casing separated. I exhaled slowly. I used a pair of non-conductive tweezers to lift the outer shell, revealing the green heart of the machine. I adjusted the focus on my loop. What I saw made my blood run cold. Standard earbuds have a simple architecture: a battery, a Bluetooth driver, and a speaker driver. This circuit board was dense, layered with components that had no business being in an audio device. I picked up my digital oscilloscope and touched the probes to the test points on the board. The readings spiked immediately. The power rail was active. Even though the device was turned off and disconnected from any phone, it was drawing a steady microcurrent. I followed the traces on the board with my eyes, tracing the copper lines like a road map. They bypassed the Bluetooth module entirely and led to a tiny black chip, specifically hidden beneath the battery mount. It was a dedicated, passive listening module. I recognized the architecture. It was a variation of a bug we used to plant in embassies during the Cold War, but modernized with solid-state memory. This chip was hardwired to a graphene microphone that was sensitive enough to pick up a heartbeat from 3 feet away. It was not just waiting for a command. It was recording. Always. It was caching audio data into a local buffer, waiting for a connection to upload everything it had heard. Dominic was not just stealing my voice print to open a gate. He was wiretapping my entire life. He wanted to know who I talked to, where I went, and who I trusted. I looked at the tiny black square under the glass and realized that for the last 6 hours, I had been carrying a spy in my pocket. I carefully reassembled the casing, pressing the seams back together until they clicked. I set the earbud down. I knew exactly what I had to do next, but I needed backup. I reached for the burner phone I kept taped under the drawer. It was time to wake up the ghosts of my past. I stared at the reassembled earbud, sitting innocently on my anti-static mat. It was a masterpiece of modern espionage. But to beat it, I did not need new technology. I needed old brutality. I walked to the bedroom closet and pushed aside the rows of flannel shirts and heavy wool coats that defined George, the warehouse manager. I knelt down on the scuffed hardwood floor. To anyone else, the third plank from the left looked just like the others, but my fingers found the imperceptible groove in the wood. I pressed down on the hidden pressure latch, and the board popped up with a groan of dry timber, revealing a dark cavity filled with insulation and secrets. I reached into the darkness and pulled out a heavy, waterproof pelican case. It was covered in a thick layer of gray dust. I had not touched this box in 20 years. Not since the day I signed my discharge papers and promised myself that my daughter would never know the things her father had done in the name of national security. I carried the case to the desk and popped the latches. The sound echoed in the silent room like the racking of a shotgun slide. Inside sat a ruggedized military laptop. It was a relic by modern standards, thick as a brick, with a casing made of magnesium alloy. But it had one advantage over Dominic's sleek iPad. It was completely invisible to the modern internet, and it was loaded with software that was illegal in 50 states. I plugged the power cord into the wall and pressed the power button. The cooling fans roared to life, sounding like a jet engine spinning up. The screen flickered green, casting a ghostly pallor over my face. There was no user-friendly interface here. No icons, just a blinking cursor waiting for a command. My fingers hovered over the mechanical keyboard. For a second I hesitated. Once I typed this code, I was no longer a civilian. I was reactivating a soldier who was supposed to be dead. But then I remembered the wireframe of my skull on Dominic's screen. I remembered the way he looked at Beatrice, like she was collateral damage. My fingers began to fly across the keys. I did not need to look. The muscle memory was still there, burned into my nerves from nights spent in cold bunkers hunting digital ghosts. I connected the earbud to the laptop using a custom interface cable. The screen flooded with cascading lines of hexadecimal code. I saw the listening demon immediately. It was aggressive, constantly pinging a remote server. I did not shut it down. If I stopped the signal, Dominic would know. Instead, I began to write a script. A wrapper. I was building a digital cage around his spy program. I would let the earbud transmit data, but only the data I wanted it to transmit. I would feed it loops of ambient noise and innocuous conversations. But more importantly, I was embedding a reverse shell into the upload packet. Every time the earbud sent a recording to Dominic's server, my script would ride along like a parasite, infecting his network from the inside. I was not just closing the door he had opened. I was walking through it to burn his house down. The cursor blinked steadily as I compiled the code. The compile complete message flashed on the screen. I sat back and exhaled. The warehouse manager was gone. The operator was back online. The knock on my door was a specific rhythmic pattern. 3 short taps, followed by 1 long thud. It was a code we had not used since 1998, but some habits are carved into your bones. I opened the door to find Kowalski standing in the rain. He was not wearing his high-visibility vest anymore. He was wearing a dark gray raincoat and carrying a duffel bag that looked heavy enough to sink a ship. He did not say hello. He just stepped inside and locked the deadbolt behind him. In 10 minutes, my small dining table, which usually held nothing more than bills and instant coffee, was transformed into a forward operating base. Kowalski unzipped the duffel bag and started pulling out equipment that officially did not exist. Signal boosters, encrypted hard drives, and a stack of manila folders that smelled like stale cigarette smoke, and archives. We pushed the furniture against the walls, covering the windows with heavy blankets to block any light leak. My apartment was no longer a home. It was a bunker. Kowalski tossed the folders onto the table, spreading them out like a fan. "I have been digging, George," he said, his voice gruff and low. "Your future son-in-law is a ghost. On paper, Dominic Vance is a venture capitalist investing in logistics tech. But look closer." He tapped a document filled with red ink. "These are shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. They have 0 employees and 0 products. But they move $50 million a year." He is not building software, George. He is washing dirty money for the cartels. And now he is using your port access to move their product. I looked at the photos in the file. Surveillance shots of Dominic shaking hands with men who were on the FBI most wanted list. And there, in the corner of one photo, smiling naively, was Beatrice. She was not a partner. She was a shield. If things went south, Dominic had set it up so she would take the fall while he walked away clean. The rage I felt was cold and sharp, like a blade of ice in my chest. He had calculated everything except for one variable. He did not know who her father really was. Kowalski looked at the laptop screen where my code was still running, watching the data stream from the earbud. "So, what is the play, George? Do we hand this over to the feds?" he asked. I shook my head slowly. "If we go to the feds now, they arrest Beatrice as an accomplice. The paper trail already implicates her. We need to clear her name first." I picked up the black earbud, turning it over in my fingers. "He wants to use this to listen to me," I said. "Fine. I will let him listen. I will feed him exactly what he wants to hear. I will act the part of the scared, compliant old man. But while he is listening to my fake fear, I will be using this connection to map his entire network. We are going to use his own weapon to slit his throat." Kowalski cracked a grim smile and pulled a chair up to the monitor. "Let's go to work," he said. My thumb hovered over the send button of my prepaid burner phone. It felt heavier than a pistol. I typed the message that I knew would seal my fate or liberate my family. "Beatrice, tell Dominic I will sign the papers tomorrow morning." I took a deep breath and pressed send. The message status changed to delivered. I set the phone down on the table and turned my attention to the rugged military laptop humming in the darkness of my apartment. I did not have to wait long. Less than 30 seconds later, the audio waveform on my screen spiked violently. I adjusted the gain on the receiver. I was not in the penthouse with them, but through the hijacked microphone in the earbud that Dominic was likely holding, or had set down on a hard surface, I heard everything, as if I were a ghost haunting his living room. I heard his laughter first. It was a dry, arrogant bark that made my skin crawl. "I told you," he said. His voice was crystal clear in my headset, thanks to the very technology he had tried to use against me. "Everyone has a price, Beatrice. Even your saint of a father just wants to feel useful. He thinks he is saving you, but he is just saving his own relevance." I gritted my teeth, listening to him mock the man he thought he had broken. I watched Kowalski sitting in the shadows, his jaw tight as he listened to the same audio feed. Then came the sound of a heavy tumbler splashing liquid. Whiskey, probably. Then the sound of a different phone being dialed. This was it. The moment of no return. The call connected. The voice on the other end spoke in rapid-fire Spanish. Dominic did not waste time with pleasantries. "The gate is open," he said, switching to flawless Spanish, a dialect specific to the Sinaloa region. "Move the product tonight. The lion is asleep." On my screen, a dormant window suddenly flashed red. It was the tracking program I had written to hunt for the encrypted GPS handshake of the shipment. A new signal had just come online. A red line shot across the digital map, starting in a warehouse district in Tijuana, crossing the border at a checkpoint I knew was compromised, and beginning its long journey north up the Interstate 5 corridor. It was not just a truck on a map. It was a digital signature unique to the tracking beacon Dominic had placed in the cargo. He had activated the shipment. He had committed the federal crime I needed him to commit. Up until this moment, he was just a man with bad intentions. Now he was an active trafficker, moving $5 million of narcotics across state lines. He thought the lion was asleep. He did not realize the lion was wide awake and watching him from the tall grass, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I looked at Kowalski. He did not say a word. He just nodded and marked the time on the whiteboard in red marker. The trap was set. Now we just had to wait for the prey to walk right into the cage. The coffee in the break room tasted like burnt rubber and regret. But I drank it anyway, because I needed the caffeine to keep my hands steady. The Port of Seattle Operations Center was waking up around me, a hive of activity filled with the beep of scanners and the shouting of foremen coordinating the morning shift. To anyone looking at me, I was just George, the senior logistics manager, staring blankly at his monitors, waiting for the caffeine to kick in. But under the desk, my left hand was gripping my smartphone so hard my knuckles were white. On the main screen, a silent alarm was flashing. It was a subtle red border around the network status bar that only a system administrator would notice. Dominic was making his move. He was not waiting for me to sign the physical papers. He was using the biometric voice print he had stolen from me the night before to force his way into the mainframe. I watched the command line interface on my hidden phone screen. The username G_Caldwell was attempting to execute a Level 4 override on the security protocols for Container Terminal 4. He was using my name to break down the door. "Hey, George, looks like your terminal is having a seizure." It was Miller, the young IT tech with the messy hair and the sarcastic attitude. He rolled his chair over to my desk, pointing at the flickering screen. "You might want to reboot before you crash the whole West Coast grid, old man." I forced a confused chuckle, playing the part of the technologically illiterate grandfather perfectly. "I do not know what I did, Miller," I said, scratching my head. "I was just trying to open the inventory spreadsheet and everything started blinking. Did I break the internet again?" Miller laughed, shaking his head, and reached for my keyboard. "Move over. Let me take a look," he said. This was the moment of maximum danger. If Miller saw the source code of the intrusion, he would see that the attack was coming from a remote server using my credentials. He would call security, and I would be in handcuffs before lunch. I had to divert the attack without Miller seeing it and without Dominic knowing he was being blocked. While Miller was typing on my keyboard, trying to run a standard diagnostic, my thumb flew across the screen of my phone under the desk. I did not block Dominic's connection. If I put up a firewall, he would know I was on to him. Instead, I executed a script I had written at 3 a.m. It was a digital hall of mirrors. I created a virtual clone of the container management system. On my phone screen, I watched the code turn from red to green. I had successfully rerouted Dominic's attack into a sandbox environment. He thought he was navigating the real Port Authority database, but he was actually wandering through a fake maze I had constructed for him. On his end, he would see success messages. He would think he had bypassed the security grid, but in reality, he was just unlocking empty doors in a simulation. Miller hit the enter key on my keyboard, and the screen flickered back to normal. Weird, he muttered. Must have been a glitch in the update. You are good to go, George. Just try not to download any viruses, okay? He rolled away, satisfied with his own brilliance. I exhaled a breath I did not know I was holding. I looked at the screen where the calm blue logistic map masked the invisible war I was fighting. Dominic was inside my trap now. He felt powerful. He felt in control. And that was exactly where I wanted him. The vibration in my pocket was violent and sustained. It was not a text message. It was a call. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I needed to set the stage. I needed to sound flustered, overwhelmed, and completely out of my depth. I picked up the phone and held it to my ear with a trembling hand. "Hello?" I said, my voice pitching up slightly into a nervous waver. "What did you do, George?" Dominic's voice was not the smooth baritone of the charming son-in-law anymore. It was jagged and sharp, like broken glass. My screen just turned red. It says access denied. What did you touch? I pulled the phone away from my ear for a second, letting his anger spill out into the noisy air of the operations center. Around me, forklifts were backing up and radios were squawking, but in my head, everything was silent, except for the calculations running through my mind. The sandbox environment I had created was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It had thrown up a fake firewall error, stalling him just enough to make him panic. I do not know Dominic, I stammered into the receiver. The screen started blinking. Miller, the IT guy, said something about a mandatory system update. I think I might have clicked the wrong window. Is it broken? Did I break the internet? I waited. Silence stretched out on the other end of the line. I could practically hear Dominic grinding his teeth, trying to control his rage. He was weighing his options. If he yelled too much, I might get scared and go to the real IT department for help, which would expose his unauthorized connection. He needed to keep me calm but compliant. He needed to manage the incompetent old man. Listen to me very carefully, George, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that sent a chill down my spine. Do not call IT. Do not talk to anyone. Just reboot the terminal. Now. If you mess this up, it is not just your job on the line. Beatrice is sitting right here with me. She is looking very anxious about this deal. You would not want to disappoint her, would you? Or worse, put her in a difficult position with my investors. The threat was clear. He was not talking about money. He was talking about safety. My hand tightened around the phone until the plastic creaked. I forced myself to sound pathetic. I am sorry, Dominic, I whined. I am restarting it now. Please do not be mad. Just give me a minute. I am not good with these new systems. Just fix it, he snapped, and the line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. The fear vanished from my face, instantly replaced by a cold, hard stare. I typed a single command into my hidden terminal. Release sandbox lock. On the main screen, the red error message faded, replaced by a green system ready bar. But it was still a simulation. I had just bought myself time, and more importantly, I had confirmed his desperation. A man who threatens his girlfriend's father over a computer glitch is a man who is already panicking. To Dominic, I was a stumbling block. A senile old fool who could not navigate a Windows update. He had no idea that the glitch was a carefully coded tripwire. Every time he tried to bypass it, he revealed another layer of his encryption keys to my sniffer program. He thought he was bullying me into submission. In reality, he was handing me the keys to his kingdom, one angry phone call at a time. The black Mercedes G-Wagon looked like an alien spacecraft parked next to the rusted hull of the container ship. It took up 2 spaces in the employee lot, its polished chrome gleaming aggressively under the gray Seattle sky. I watched through the blinds of my office window as Dominic stepped out. He was wearing a beige trench coat and sunglasses that cost more than my first car. He did not look like a man coming to help an old relative with a computer problem. He looked like a landlord coming to evict a tenant who had missed a payment. He walked across the tarmac, ignoring the safety lines, stepping over cables with a look of disdain. When he pushed open the door to my glass box office, the noise of the port seemed to die down instantly, sucked away by the vacuum of his presence. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was. He walked straight to my desk and gestured for me to get up. "Move," he said, his voice flat and devoid of the charm he usually plastered on for Beatrice. I stood up, shuffling my feet, acting the part of the confused senior citizen. "I am sorry, Dominic," I mumbled, wringing my hands. "It just froze. I was scared. I deleted the database." He ignored me, sitting down in my chair and cracking his knuckles. I watched his fingers fly across the keyboard. He was entering a root command sequence. It was sloppy code, arrogant code, but effective enough for a brute force entry. He hit the enter key with a flourish. The screen flashed, and the red error message I had fabricated vanished, replaced by the blue login screen of the secure server. "There," he said, spinning the chair around to face me. "Fixed. It was not broken, George. You just lacked the touch." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the chaotic ballet of the gantry cranes moving shipping containers that weighed 30 tons each. "Dangerous place, isn't it?" he mused quietly. He was not looking at the ships. He was looking at the suspended loads swinging precariously overhead. So many moving parts, so much heavy steel hanging by thin cables. It makes you realize how fragile life is. He turned back to me, taking off his sunglasses. His eyes were cold, hard flint. "Accidents happen all the time down here, don't they, George? People trip, cables snap. Sometimes people just disappear between the stacks and nobody finds them for days. It would be a shame if something like that happened to Beatrice's father. She would be devastated. She might even be too distracted to sign the trust fund papers I prepared for her." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He was not just threatening my job. He was threatening to drop a shipping container on my head and make it look like a workplace tragedy. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from the effort it took not to reach out and crush his windpipe. I forced myself to look down at my boots. "I will be careful, Dominic," I whispered. "I promise. No more mistakes." He smiled, patting my cheek with a palm that felt damp. "Good," he said. "Stay safe, George. We need you healthy for the wedding." He walked out, leaving the door open. I watched him go, knowing that he thought he had just terrified a helpless old man into submission. He did not know that while he was staring out the window threatening my life, I had used my body to block his view of the USB port on his laptop, where I had just inserted a wireless keystroke logger. The game was on. As soon as Dominic's trench coat disappeared behind the frosted glass of my office door, I moved. I did not run, because running in a shipyard attracts attention. I walked with the clipped, purposeful stride of a floor manager checking a discrepancy on the manifest. My heart was not racing. My pulse was slow, steady, and rhythmic. This was the zone. This was where the tired old man evaporated and the operative returned. The rain had started to fall again, a cold, misty drizzle that slicked the asphalt and blurred the edges of the shipping containers. The black Mercedes G-Wagon sat isolated in the reserved spot, looking less like a car and more like a tank designed for suburban warfare. It was a fortress of German engineering aimed at projecting power and wealth. But every fortress has a back door, if you know how to pick the lock. I reached into the deep pocket of my canvas work jacket and withdrew a device no larger than a pack of gum. It was a rolling code grabber I had assembled from spare drone parts and a Raspberry Pi Zero. Modern luxury cars use a cryptographic handshake between the key fob and the chassis. The car sends a challenge and the key sends a response. But there is a flaw in the logic known as a replay attack window. When Dominic locked his car 30 seconds ago walking into my office, my device in my pocket had passively recorded the signal. It captured the code he used to lock the door. Now I just needed to calculate the next code in the sequence. It was a mathematical guess, but with the processing power I had packed into this little box, I had a 90% probability of success. I stood by the driver's side door. I did not look around. Acting guilty is what gets you caught. I simply held the device near the door handle and pressed the transmit button. I watched the small red LED on my box pulse once, twice, 3 times. It was cycling through the captured frequencies, searching for the cryptographic match. For a second, nothing happened, and I feared Dominic had upgraded his security to a biometrics-only system. Then came the sound. A heavy mechanical thunk as the magnetic locks disengaged, followed by the double flash of the amber indicators. The car believed its master had returned. I opened the heavy door and slipped into the driver's seat, pulling the door shut but not latching it completely to avoid the noise. The interior smelled of expensive leather and stale cologne, a scent that reminded me of everything I hated about the man who was trying to buy my daughter. I checked my watch. I had passed the first hurdle, but the clock was ticking. Dominic was a fast typist. He would finish his brute force hack on my computer in less than 5 minutes. I had to find what I was looking for and get out, without leaving a trace that I had ever been there. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the enemy, and began my search. The interior of the Mercedes was a fortress of silence, but I did not have the luxury of enjoying the quiet. I scanned the dashboard until I found the silver button for the rear tailgate. I pressed it and watched in the rearview mirror as the heavy door swung open slowly. I stepped out of the vehicle and into the drizzle, pulling my collar up. To any security guard watching on the perimeter cameras, I was just an old man looking for an umbrella or a spare jacket in the back of his boss's car. I walked to the rear of the vehicle. The cargo bay appeared empty, save for a set of golf clubs, but I knew Dominic. He was a man who liked layers. I pushed the golf clubs aside and found the latch for the subflooring where the spare tire should have been. I lifted the heavy carpeted panel. There was no tire. Instead, there was a customized steel lockbox welded directly to the frame of the chassis. It was a serious piece of security hardware, but Dominic had made a rookie mistake. He had left the key in the lock. He was so arrogant, so sure of his untouchable status that he did not even bother to secure his contingency plans. I turned the key, and the lid popped open with a hiss of pneumatic hydraulics. Inside sat a single thick leather portfolio. My hands moved with the precision of a surgeon as I opened it. The first page was a standard bill of lading. It listed the cargo as high-end graphics cards coming from a supplier in Shenzhen. The HS code was correct. The weight distribution looked plausible. To a customs officer scanning paperwork at 5 in the morning, this would look like a standard tech shipment. But I turned the page. Stapled to the back was a chemical analysis report from a lab in Mexico. I scanned the molecular breakdown, and my stomach turned over. It was not silicon. It was fentanyl citrate. Pure, uncut, synthetic death. Enough to kill half the population of Seattle. I did quickly mental math. The street value of this shipment wasn't $5 million like he told Beatrice. It was closer to 20. Then I saw the line that made me want to burn the world down. At the bottom of the consignee field, typed in clear, bold letters, was the name Beatrice Caldwell. And below it was a signature. It looked exactly like hers. He had not just forged her signature, he had practiced it. He had spent hours perfecting the loop of the B and the slant of the C. He was not just using her to clear customs, he was setting her up as the kingpin. If this shipment was intercepted, Dominic would claim he was just an investor who had been duped by his girlfriend. The paperwork proved she was the importer of record. She would go to federal prison for life, and he would walk away, claiming he was a victim of love. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I began to photograph every page. I captured the chemical report, the false manifest, and the forged signature. I made sure the metadata on the photos would show the GPS coordinates of Dominic's car. Click, click, click. Each shutter sound was a nail in his coffin. I closed the portfolio and placed it back in the safe. I lowered the floor panel and shut the trunk. As I walked back to the driver's seat, I felt a terrifying clarity. There was no saving Dominic now. There was only the question of how much he would suffer before the end. The rain hammered against the rusted roof of my old Ford truck, creating a deafening rhythm that matched the pounding of blood in my ears. I sat in the cab, staring at the glowing screen of my phone. The image of the forged signature seemed to burn into my retinas. Beatrice Caldwell. It was written with such confidence, such practiced ease. Dominic had not just planned to use her, he had planned to destroy her. He had built a golden cage of lies and was preparing to lock her inside it for the rest of her life while he counted his millions on a beach in non-extradition territory. My hand drifted to the glove compartment. I knew exactly what was inside. A snub-nosed .38 special wrapped in an oilcloth. It was unregistered, untraceable, and fully loaded. For a terrifying moment, the world narrowed down to a single violent possibility. I could walk back into that office right now. I could walk past the security cameras I knew how to avoid. I could walk right up to his desk while he was still smugly typing on his keyboard, and I could end this nightmare with a single pull of the trigger. It would be justice. It would be primal and satisfying to watch the light go out in the eyes of the man who viewed my daughter as disposable collateral. But then I looked at the photo of the signature again. If I killed him now, the narrative was already written. The police would find the fentanyl in the car registered to him, but the paperwork would point to Beatrice. Without Dominic alive to confess or be exposed, the law would look at the evidence. They would see a grieving girlfriend who was actually a drug kingpin, and a violent father who murdered her partner to cover up the crime. Beatrice would still go to prison. I would go to prison. And Dominic would win, even from the grave, because he had legally insulated himself so perfectly. I pulled my hand back from the glove box. I forced my breathing to slow down. I closed my eyes and visualized the rage inside me. I took that red-hot anger and pushed it down into a cold, dark place in my gut. I did not need to be a father right now. I needed to be a handler. I needed to be the cold, calculating bastard the government had trained me to be 40 years ago. I picked up the burner phone and dialed Kowalski. He answered on the first ring. "It is bad," I said, my voice sounding hollow and metallic in the small cab. It is not just electronics, Kowalski. It is fentanyl. $20 million worth. And the paperwork is watertight. He has set her up as the importer of record. If that shipment gets stopped by anyone other than us, she goes away for life. There was a silence on the other line, then the sound of a lighter clicking. So the direct approach is out, Kowalski said. We cannot just tip off the DEA. No, I replied, watching the rain blur the lights of the port. If the DEA raids the shipment, Beatrice takes the fall. We need to flip the script. We need him to take possession. We need him to be the one holding the smoking gun when the lights go on. Initiate Plan B. I am going back in there. I am going to sign his release forms. I am going to smile and shake his hand. And then, I am going to guide him straight into hell. The walk back to the glass office felt like crossing a minefield. Every step had to be measured. I paused at the heavy metal door, shaking the cold Seattle rain from my canvas coat. Not just to dry off, but to reset my features. I slumped my shoulders, letting the invisible weight of 40 years on the docks pull me down, until my posture screamed defeat. I needed to look like a man beaten by the system, not a man who had just cracked a safe and secured the evidence to put a cartel behind bars. I took a deep breath, letting the rage settle into the pit of my stomach, and pushed the door open. Dominic was pacing the small room like a tiger, waiting for its feeding time. He had his phone to his ear, but he hung up the moment he saw me. His eyes narrowed, scanning my face for any sign of rebellion. "Where have you been?" he snapped, checking his gold Rolex. "The system is ready, George. We are running out of time." "I am sorry, Dominic," I muttered, keeping my eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor. I just needed some air. My stomach is in knots. I walked around the desk and sank into my creaking chair. The stack of customs release forms sat in the center of the desk like a death warrant. Dominic leaned over, placing his hands flat on the desk, invading my space. "Do not be dramatic, George," he said, his voice smooth but edged with steel. "This is standard procedure. You verify the container ID, you check the weight, and you sign the release. It is just paper." I reached for the cheap plastic ballpoint pen. I let my hand tremble just enough to be noticeable. It was a calculated performance. I wanted him to see the hesitation. I wanted him to believe that he was breaking my will. Is this really safe, Dominic?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. "If Customs decides to do a random spot check and they find something—" He cut me off with a scoff, laughing as if I had told a joke. "They won't check, George, because you are the one telling them it is clean. That is the beauty of it. Your safety record is impeccable. They trust you. And because they trust you, they trust me. Now sign. For Beatrice." He knew exactly which button to press. He used my daughter's name like a weapon. I let out a shaky sigh and pressed the pen to the paper. The ink flowed, sealing the deal. I wrote my name, George Caldwell, in the box marked Inspector of Record. With that signature, I was not just clearing a container. I was legally taking custody of the shipment. To Dominic, it looked like I was becoming his accomplice. In reality, I was ensuring that when the trap snapped shut, he would have nowhere to run, because I was the only one with the power to direct that container into the hands of the police. I pushed the papers toward him, keeping my head low. Dominic snatched them up before the ink was even dry. A grin spread across his face, predatory and satisfied. He walked around the desk and gripped my shoulder, squeezing hard. "There," he said, his voice dripping with mock affection. That wasn't so hard, was it? You are a good man, George, a smart man. He patted my cheek, 2 sharp taps that felt like insults. You are a good boy. He turned and walked out, whistling a tune. He did not look back. He did not see the way my eyes lifted cold and clear the moment he was gone. He thought he had just trained a dog. He didn't know he had just unlocked the cage of a wolf. Dominic folded the signed customs release forms with a satisfying crisp sound and tucked them into the inside pocket of his beige cashmere trench coat. He looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with that insufferable mixture of pity and triumph. He believed he had just successfully bullied a senile old man into becoming an accessory to a federal crime. He picked up his sunglasses from my desk and turned toward the door, his movements loose and relaxed. He had what he came for. "Wait, Dominic," I called out, my voice trembling slightly as I stood up from my chair. I shuffled around the desk, keeping my head lowered. You have some grease on your coat. It must have rubbed off when you sat down. This is an expensive coat. I would hate for Beatrice to see you looking messy. I reached out my right hand, hovering near his shoulder. Dominic stopped and looked down at his pristine sleeve with a frown of annoyance, where he snapped, twisting his torso to see. "Right here," I said, moving in close. My left hand brushed the lint-free fabric of his shoulder, distracting him. At the exact same moment, my right hand moved with the speed of a striking cobra. I was holding the tiny, stripped-down microphone module I had harvested from the black earbuds the night before. It was smaller than a fingernail, a jagged piece of silicone and wire that I had wrapped in a tiny ball of sticky acoustic putty. As I pretended to brush a non-existent smudge off his collar, my thumb slipped under the heavy fold of the fabric. I pressed the chip deep into the seam where the wool met the silk lining. It stuck fast, hidden completely by the bulk of the coat. I patted the fabric down, smoothing it out. "There," I said, stepping back and clasping my hands together. "Good as new." Dominic brushed his shoulder off aggressively, clearly disgusted that I had touched him. "Yeah, thanks, George," he muttered, not even looking at me. "Just make sure the container is moved to the holding bay by midnight. Do not make me come back down here." I watched him walk out of the office. He looked like a king leaving his subjects. But as he crossed the threshold into the noisy corridor, I was already moving. I locked the door and sprinted back to my desk. I pulled my phone out and opened the audio application I had coded. I plugged in my own wired headset and closed my eyes. The static hissed for a second, and then the sound profile stabilized. I heard the rhythmic squeak of leather shoes on linoleum. I heard the chime of the elevator arrival. I heard Dominic breathing. The audio was so clear, it sounded like he was standing right next to me. He stepped into the elevator, and the doors slid shut. I heard him exhale a long breath of relief, followed by a low, dark chuckle. "Too easy," he whispered to himself. "The old man is softer than wet cardboard." I sat there in the silence of my office, a cold smile finally breaking through my facade. "You are wrong, Dominic," I whispered back, knowing he could not hear me. "You just invited the police into your pocket. I am not soft. I am just patient. And now I am going to be with you every step of the way until the moment the handcuffs click." I checked the battery life on the receiver. The chip had 48 hours of power. The hunt was officially live. The green line on my laptop screen danced in the darkness, a visual representation of the devil standing in his living room 5 miles away. I sat in my small kitchen, surrounded by cold cups of coffee and the humming of military-grade encryption drives. I adjusted the noise reduction filter on the software. The static hissed and popped like frying bacon before clearing into the sharp, high-definition audio of Dominic's voice. He was pacing. I could hear the distinct rhythmic click of his dress shoes on the marble floor of the penthouse. He was comfortable. He was safe. He thought he was alone. The phone on his end rang twice before a voice answered. It was deep, distorted by a scrambler, but clear enough to understand. "Is the asset secured?" the voice asked. It was a voice that sounded like gravel grinding against steel, the voice of a man who ordered executions while eating breakfast. Dominic laughed, a sound that made my grip tighten on the edge of the table. "The asset is compliant," he said. "I have the release form signed by the inspector himself. The old man is terrified of his own shadow. He thinks he is saving his job. He has no idea he just signed off on $20 million of inventory." I watched the waveform spike as Dominic poured himself another drink. The ice clinked against the glass, a cheerful sound that contrasted with the venom in his words. "And the girl?" the gravel voice asked. "Is she going to be a problem?" Dominic paused. I held my breath. This was the moment. This was the confirmation I needed. "She is in love," Dominic said dismissively. "She will do whatever I tell her. But once the shipment clears, she becomes a liability. Her name is on the import documents. If we leave her alive, she might crack under interrogation." My heart stopped. The blood froze in my veins. I stared at the screen, waiting for him to take it back, waiting for him to show a shred of humanity. "Dispose of her," the gravel voice said. "And the father?" "Agreed," Dominic replied without a second of hesitation. "Make it look like an overdose. For Beatrice, she has been stressed lately. It will be believable. As for George, well, the port is a dangerous place. Heavy machinery malfunctions all the time. Maybe he gets crushed by a container. Maybe he falls into the harbor. Either way, clean slate by Monday morning." I reached out and pressed the stop recording button. My hand was not shaking. It was steady as a rock. A strange calm had washed over me. The fear was gone. The anxiety was gone. In their place was a cold, crystalline clarity. Dominic had just crossed the line from a criminal to a dead man walking. He was not just stealing from me. He was planning to slaughter my family like livestock. I saved the audio file to 3 separate encrypted drives. I named the file "Evidence of Conspiracy to Commit Capital Murder." I took off the headset and stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the rain-slicked streets of Seattle. Dominic thought he was planning a cleanup operation. He did not know that he had just given the order for his own destruction. I was not going to let him touch a hair on Beatrice's head. I was going to turn his workplace accident into a precision strike that would leave him with nothing but a prison cell and a lifetime of regret. The time for observation was over. The time for action had arrived. The rain outside was relentless drumming against the shingles like 1,000 nervous fingers, but inside my house the silence was absolute. I had spent the last 6 hours transforming my modest 2-bedroom Craftsman into a high-definition recording studio. To the untrained eye, nothing had changed. The family photos still sat on the mantel. The rug was still slightly crooked in the hallway, but the reality was buried beneath the surface. I had unscrewed the faceplate of the smoke detector in the living room and inserted a fiber optic lens no wider than a needle. It commanded a perfect 180-degree view of the sofa where Dominic would inevitably sit to assert his dominance. Under the dining table, I had taped a cluster of high-gain microphones, specifically calibrated to filter out the ambient noise of the refrigerator and focus on human speech frequencies. I tested the feed on my tablet. I could hear the sound of a pin dropping in the kitchen from the bedroom. I moved to the flower vase in the center of the table. Among the artificial lilies, I hid a third camera directed specifically at the chair I had set for Beatrice. I needed to capture her face. I needed the jury to see her genuine shock and confusion when the truth finally came out. If I was going to save her, I needed proof that she was a victim, not a co-conspirator. With the surveillance grid active, I walked to the heavy iron safe in the back of my closet. I spun the dial and pulled the handle. The smell of gun oil and cold steel hit me, a scent that was more familiar to me than the smell of sawdust or sea salt. I reached in and withdrew my service pistol, a Sig Sauer P226 that had been my constant companion in deployments I was not allowed to talk about. I sat on the edge of the bed and racked the slide. The mechanical clack was satisfying. It was a sound of finality. I ejected the magazine and checked the rounds. Hollow points, designed to stop a threat instantly. I held the weapon in my hand, feeling its weight, its balance. It would be so easy. Dominic would walk through the door, I would raise the weapon, and the world would be a cleaner place. I visualized it. The look of surprise on his face. The spray of red on the white walls. It was a tempting fantasy, a fast solution to a complicated problem. But then I thought about the phone call I had intercepted. I thought about how casually he planned to discard my daughter. A bullet was too merciful for a man like Dominic Vance. A bullet ends the suffering. I did not want him to end. I wanted him to rot. I wanted him to wake up every morning for the next 40 years in a 6x8 concrete cell, knowing that the illiterate dock worker he mocked was the one who put him there. I wanted him stripped of his arrogance, his wealth, and his freedom. I slowly released the slide and placed the gun back into the safe. I spun the lock. I would not use lead tonight. I would use the law. I would use his own words. I stood up and walked into the kitchen. I took a frozen turkey out of the freezer and set it on the counter to thaw. I began to chop vegetables, my knife hitting the cutting board with rhythmic precision. The stage was set. The microphones were hot. The cameras were rolling. I was just a father cooking a Thanksgiving dinner for his family. But when Dominic walked through that door tomorrow, he wasn't walking into a home. He was walking into a kill box, and he wouldn't even know he was dead until the steel door slammed shut behind him. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock, cutting through the silence of the house like a fire alarm. I took one last look at the hidden camera lens nestled among the artificial flowers on the dining table, making sure the red recording light was taped over. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked to the door. When I opened it, the smell of expensive cologne and damp wool rushed in, instantly overpowering the aroma of roasted sage and thyme I had spent all afternoon cultivating. Dominic walked in first, not waiting to be invited. He was wearing a different suit today, a charcoal gray number that looked sharp enough to draw blood. He did not look at me. His eyes darted immediately to the grandfather clock in the hallway. He checked it against the gold Rolex on his wrist, a nervous tick that betrayed his internal countdown. Beatrice followed him, looking like a fragile doll in a dress that was too thin for the Seattle winter. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she had been crying in the car. But the moment she saw me, she plastered on a bright, brittle smile that broke my heart. "Happy Thanksgiving, Daddy," she said, stepping forward to hug me. She felt thin in my arms, too thin. As she pulled away, she held up her left hand. The light from the hallway chandelier caught the stone on her ring finger. "Look," she whispered, her voice trembling with forced excitement. "He finally proposed. It happened in the car on the way over." I took her hand in mine, pretending to admire the ring. It was massive, a gaudy rock surrounded by a halo of smaller stones. But I have spent time in parts of the world where diamonds are currency, and I know what a real one looks like. This was moissanite. High-quality glass designed to fool the untrained eye. It was a perfect metaphor for her relationship. Shiny, impressive on the surface, but ultimately worthless and manufactured. "That is beautiful, sweetheart," I said, lying through my teeth. "Dominic, you have outdone yourself." Dominic grunted from the living room, already pacing the rug. "Just something to seal the deal," he muttered, looking at his phone again. "Can we eat, George? We have a tight schedule tonight." We sat down at the small table. The air was so thick with tension, it felt hard to breathe. I stood at the head of the table, facing them. In front of me lay the golden roasted turkey. To my right lay the carving knife, a 12-inch blade of high-carbon steel that I kept razor sharp. I picked up the knife and the honing steel. Shing! Shing! The sound of metal sliding against metal rang out in the quiet room, loud and aggressive. Dominic looked up from his phone, startled by the noise. I stared straight at him as I ran the blade down the steel one more time. "I hope you are hungry, Dominic," I said, my voice low and steady. "It takes a long time to prepare a bird like this. You have to clean it out completely. You have to remove the giblets, the neck, everything that rots, and then you have to put it in the fire until it is done." Dominic swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He looked at the knife in my hand, then at my eyes. For a second the arrogance slipped, and I saw a flicker of genuine fear. He realized that the old man holding the knife was not looking at the turkey. He was looking at the neck of the man who had lied to his daughter. I plunged the knife into the meat, severing the leg from the bone with a single decisive crunch. "White meat or dark?" I asked. "Because tonight, everyone gets exactly what they deserve." The silence at the table was punctuated only by the aggressive scrape of silver against china. Beatrice was picking at her food, pushing a piece of roasted carrot around her plate, like she was trying to hide it. Dominic ate with the ravenous speed of a man who thought he was untouchable, tearing into the meat I had carved for him. I sat at the head of the table sipping my water and touching the small modified receiver in my left ear. To them it looked like a hearing aid for an old man. To me, it was a direct line to the truth engine I had running on the server in my bedroom. "So Dominic," I said, my voice breaking the tension, "we are about to be family. Beatrice tells me you are a self-made man, but I realized I do not know much about your people. Where do the Vances come from?" Dominic paused mid-chew. He wiped his mouth with the linen napkin, a slow, deliberate motion to buy time. He did not like being questioned, but he needed to keep the peace until midnight. "I grew up in Chicago," he said, his voice dropping into a register of practiced humility. "South Side. My father was a union steel worker. My mother cleaned houses. We did not have much, but they taught me the value of hard work. That is why I respect what you do, George. We come from the same cloth." In my ear, a cool, robotic voice whispered instantly. "Statement. False. Subject, Dominic Vance. Born, Daniel Vanzetti. Scarsdale, New York. Father is a retired orthodontist. Mother is a real estate agent. No record of residence in Chicago." I smiled. It was a genuine smile. the kind a predator gives when the prey steps into the snare. "Is that so?" I asked, leaning forward. "A steel worker? That is tough work. Dangerous work." Did he ever talk about the accidents, the crushed limbs, the noise? Dominic took a sip of wine. He never complained. He lied smoothly. He was a stoic man, just like you. He died when I was 18. Construction accident. That is when I knew I had to build something better for myself. I did not want to die with dirt under my fingernails. The voice in my ear spoke again. Statement: false. Father alive, currently residing in Florida. Subject has not contacted family in 7 years. I looked at Beatrice. She was looking at Dominic with dewy eyes, completely sold on his tragic backstory. She squeezed his hand lovingly. "Dominic is so strong, Daddy," she said. "He built his company from nothing with just a small loan." The robotic voice corrected her immediately. Initial capital funding linked to shell companies in Juarez. Money laundering confirmed. I nodded slowly, slicing another piece of turkey. "It is amazing," I said, my tone dripping with hidden sarcasm. "To rise from the ashes like that. You must be very proud of the fiction you have created, Dominic. I mean, the life you have created." He narrowed his eyes slightly, sensing a double meaning in my words, but he was too arrogant to believe I knew the truth. He thought I was just a senile old man rambling. He did not know that every lie he told was being cross-referenced and logged. He was building his own perjury case, one sentence at a time. I raised my glass. "To the truth," I said. "May it always find a way to surface." Dominic hesitated, then raised his glass. "To family," he replied. I drank watching him, knowing that by tomorrow morning the only family he would have would be a cellmate. I reached for the bottle of wine, my hand shaking, with a deliberate tremor that sent a splash of red liquid onto the pristine white tablecloth. It spread like a fresh wound blooming on the fabric. "Oops," I muttered, slurring my words just enough to sell the performance of a man who had had too much to drink and was crumbling under the pressure. "I am getting clumsy in my old age, Dominic. I really am sorry." Dominic looked at the stain with unmasked disgust. He set his fork down with a sharp clatter. "You have had enough, George," he said coldly. "Maybe you should go lie down. We have to leave soon anyway." He checked his watch again. The countdown in his head was reaching critical mass. He thought the container was about to move through the gate using the credentials he had stolen from me. I took a large gulp of wine, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand, a gesture I knew he would find repulsive. "You know," I said, leaning back in my chair and staring at the ceiling, "I was worried about that, about the timeline. So I made a call to the night shift supervisor just before you arrived. I wanted to be helpful." Dominic froze. His entire body went rigid. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I smiled, a sloppy, lopsided grin that made me look like a fool. "I told him to reset the gate codes," I said, "just to be safe. Since I signed the release forms, I wanted to make sure nobody else could tamper with the container. So I authorized a full encryption rotation. The old codes, the ones you have, they won't work anymore." The reaction was instantaneous and violent. Dominic slammed his fist onto the table, making the china jump and the water glasses rattle. "You did what?" he screamed, standing up so fast his chair toppled over backward. "You scrambled the keys." I cowered in my seat, holding my hands up in mock defense. I thought I was helping," I stammered. "I thought you would be happy." Happy! He roared, his face turning a violent shade of crimson. You stupid, senile old man. Do you have any idea what you have done? The trucks are already on the schedule. If the codes do not match the biometric lock, the cargo seizes automatically. You just locked down $5 million of inventory. That is my money. That is my $5 million sitting in a metal box, and you just threw away the key. The silence that followed was deafening. The number hung in the air like smoke. $5 million. I kept my face buried in my hands, pretending to be terrified. But through the gaps in my fingers, I was watching Beatrice. She was staring at him. Her face was pale, all the color draining away until she looked like a ghost. She looked from the angry man she loved to the terrified father she wanted to protect. She stood up slowly, her hands trembling. $5 million, she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but in the silence, it sounded like a scream. Dominic, you said it was computer parts for a startup. You said it was a favor for a friend. You told me the whole shipment was worth $50,000 tops. Where did you get $5 million? Dominic realized his mistake immediately. He saw the look in her eyes, the dawning realization that the man standing in front of her was a stranger. He tried to compose himself, smoothing his suit jacket and forcing a manic smile onto his face. It is an investment, Beatrice, he said, his voice shifting into a desperate attempt at calm. The graphics cards are rare. The market fluctuates. I exaggerated the number because I was angry. No, Beatrice said, shaking her head. You didn't say it was the company's money. You said it was your money. You said, that is my $5 million. Who are you, Dominic? What is really in that container? I watched him squirm. I watched the sweat bead on his forehead. The mask had slipped. He wasn't the charming boyfriend anymore. He was the desperate criminal losing control of his operation. I took another sip of wine, hiding my smirk behind the glass. The voice in my ear confirmed it. Confession recorded. Value of illicit goods confirmed. Motive established. I had him. The windshield wipers slashed back and forth violently, trying to clear the sheet of water that hammered against the glass. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, and the world had dissolved into a blurred gray nightmare of rain and concrete. Inside the luxury cabin of the SUV, there was no warmth left. The heater was blasting, but Beatrice was shivering so hard her teeth chattered. She pressed herself against the leather passenger door as far away from Dominic as she could get. He drove with one hand on the wheel and the other gripping his phone, his knuckles white. The charm was gone. The sophisticated businessman who sipped wine and quoted poetry had evaporated, leaving behind a desperate animal with bared teeth. He slammed on the brakes in front of Gate 4, the tires screeching on the wet asphalt. The sudden stop threw Beatrice forward against her seatbelt. Before she could recover, Dominic was out of the car. He marched around to her side and ripped the door open. The storm rushed in, instantly soaking the expensive leather interior. "Get out!" he screamed over the roar of the wind. "We are here!" Beatrice stared at him, paralyzed by a terror she had never known. Outside the open door, the shipping terminal loomed like a city of dead giants. The towering cranes were lost in the mist, and the stacks of containers created dark canyons that looked like they led nowhere. "Dominic, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "I do not want to go in there. Let's just go home. Please, take me home." He did not answer. He reached in and grabbed her upper arm, his fingers digging into her flesh with bruising force. He dragged her out of the car. Her heels slipped on the slick pavement, and she nearly fell. But he yanked her upright like a rag doll. The rain was freezing, instantly soaking through her thin dress and plastering her hair to her face. She tried to pull away, digging her feet into the ground, but he was too strong. He marched her toward the heavy steel barrier where an idling terminal truck sat waiting, its engine rumbling like a beast in the dark. "You are going to get in that truck, Beatrice," he hissed into her ear, pushing her forward. "You are the importer of record. The automated system needs to scan your face to open the inner bay doors. I told you that you were going to help me, and you are going to finish it." Beatrice dug her fingernails into his hand, trying to pry his fingers off her arm. "No," she screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. "I know about the drugs, Dominic." "I know what is in the container. I am not going to help you." Dominic stopped. He spun her around and pinned her against the cold, wet metal of the security fence. His face was inches from hers, rain dripping from his nose. He looked at her with eyes that were completely empty of love or even recognition. "You think you have a choice?" he asked, his voice low and terrifying. "You signed the papers. You were already in this up to your neck. If I go down, you go down with me. Now get in the truck and open the gate, or I will leave you here for the police to find, with the drugs in your name." He shoved her toward the open cab of the truck. She stumbled, sobbing uncontrollably, her tears mixing with the rain. She looked up at the security camera mounted on the pole, hoping someone was watching, hoping someone would see that she was not a criminal, but a hostage. But the camera stared back with a blank, unblinking lens. She climbed up the metal steps, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the handle. Dominic climbed in right behind her, slamming the door and sealing them inside the cab. The smell of stale tobacco and grease filled her nose as he turned the key. "Drive," he commanded. "Drive!" The glass walls of the crane tower rattled under the assault of the storm, vibrating against my fingertips as I leaned over the control console. From up here, 60 feet above the asphalt, the world below looked like a toy set that someone had left out in the rain. The floodlights cut through the deluge in thick, hazy cones, illuminating the slick black ground and the towering walls of the shipping containers. I was alone in the sky, surrounded by the hum of high-voltage transformers and the quiet beep of the tactical display. To the rest of the port, I was just the night shift manager keeping an eye on the storm. But in reality, I was the gatekeeper of hell. I looked down at the bank of monitors. Screen 4 showed the grainy black and white feed of the terminal truck idling at the entrance to Zone 4. I could see the heat signatures inside the cab. Dominic was a bright red flare of aggression, moving jerkily as he shouted at Beatrice. She was a smaller, cooler shape, huddled against the door, radiating fear. Seeing them like this, reduced to thermal ghosts on a screen, made it easier to do what I had to do. Dominic was no longer a man. He was a target. He was a virus that had infected my family, and I was the antibody. Dominic was hammering on the dashboard, waiting for the automated system to recognize the credentials he had forced Beatrice to provide. He thought he was hacking the mainframe, but he was just knocking on my door, waiting for me to decide if I should let him in. I watched him for a moment longer, savoring the control. He was used to buying his way through doors or charming his way past guards. He had no idea that the only reason that gate was about to open was because I wanted him exactly where he was going. My hand hovered over the manual override switch. It was a simple plastic button, worn smooth by years of use. Usually, I pressed it to let in a late delivery or a maintenance crew. Tonight, I was pressing it to initiate a containment protocol. I took a slow, deep breath, inhaling the smell of ozone and old coffee that permeated the booth. I thought about the fear in Beatrice's eyes. I thought about the arrogant laugh in Dominic's voice when he ordered my death. I did not hesitate. I pressed down. Below me, the heavy hydraulic arms of Gate 4 groaned to life. The steel barrier lifted slowly, fighting the wind. I saw the brake lights of the truck flare as Dominic put it into gear. The vehicle lurched forward, driving past the point of no return. He was speeding up, eager to get to the container, eager to claim his prize. He did not look up. He did not see the dark silhouette in the tower, watching his every move. He drove the truck straight into Sector 9. The boys on the dock call it the dead zone. It is a blind spot in the grid, a narrow alleyway formed by 2 stacks of containers that are 5 stories high. It is a concrete canyon with only one way in and one way out. It is where we store the empty units, the damaged goods, the things that people forget about. The acoustic shadows in there are terrible. Radios do not work. Cell signals die. It is a place of absolute isolation. I watched the taillights fade into the canyon of steel. As soon as the truck was fully inside the corridor, I flipped the toggle switch down. The gates slammed shut behind them with a finality that echoed through the storm. I adjusted the joystick on my console, engaging the drive motors of the massive gantry crane I was sitting in. The entire tower shuddered and began to slide along the rails, following them into the dark. I was not just watching anymore. I was moving the chessboard pieces. The trap was sprung, and the walls were about to start closing in. I watched the truck idling in the concrete canyon, below its brake lights staining the wet asphalt red. Dominic was likely screaming at Beatrice, banging on the steering wheel, wondering why the loading crane wasn't moving. He thought this was incompetence. He thought the port was just a broken machine that he was too smart for. He was about to learn that the machine was working perfectly. I reached out to the master control panel on my left. My hand hovered over the heavy red lever labeled Emergency Blackout. This switch was designed for air raids or catastrophic electrical failures. It killed everything: the floodlights, the security cameras, the perimeter beacons. I gripped the cold plastic handle. "Let there be night," I whispered. I pulled the lever down. Instantly, the world ceased to exist. The hum of the high-voltage transformers cut out, leaving a ringing silence that was immediately filled by the roar of the rain. The massive banks of sodium vapor lights that turned night into day flickered once and died. The darkness was absolute. It was not just the absence of light. It was a physical weight that slammed down on the shipyard. Below me, the truck was swallowed by the void. Its headlights were pathetic beams cutting through the deluge, illuminating nothing but falling water and the rusted steel walls of the container stacks. I could imagine the panic inside that cab. Dominic would be scrambling, fumbling for his phone, trying to understand why the world had just ended. But I wasn't done. I swiveled my chair to the audio console. The port-wide public address system was a network of massive horn speakers mounted on every light pole and crane tower. It was designed to shout orders over the noise of diesel engines and crashing steel. I pushed the fader up to maximum volume. I did not speak. I did not want him to hear my voice. I wanted him to hear himself. I pressed play on the digital file I had edited an hour ago. A high-pitched squeal of feedback tore through the night, echoing off the metal walls like a banshee scream. Then came the static, a low, scratching sound that filled the dark air. And then, the voice. It was distorted, booming from everywhere and nowhere at once, magnified to the volume of a thunderclap. She is in love. She will do whatever I tell her. The recording echoed through the rain, bouncing between the stacks of containers. It was Dominic's voice, stripped of its charm, sounding cold and reptilian. I looked down at the truck. I saw the passenger door fly open. Beatrice was trying to run, but there was nowhere to go. The voice boomed again, rolling over them like a wave. Once the shipment clears, she becomes a liability. Dispose of her. Make it look like an overdose. I watched the scene below through my night vision monocular. Dominic had frozen. He was standing by the open door of the truck, looking up into the black sky spinning in circles. He was trying to find the source of the sound, but it was all around him. He was listening to his own conspiracy broadcast to the heavens. And the father, the recording continued, the gravelly voice of the cartel boss mixing with the wind. Clean slate by Monday morning, Dominic's voice replied, reverberating off the steel hulls. Crush him. Let him fall into the harbor. I watched Beatrice. She had stopped running. She was standing in the rain, looking back at the man she had planned to marry. The recording played the line again, louder this time, a loop of damnation. Dispose of her. Dispose of her. Dispose of her. It was psychological flaying. I was stripping away every lie he had ever told her, leaving him naked in the dark with nothing but his own cruelty to keep him warm. The trap was not just physical. It was moral. And he had just stepped onto the landmine. The voice from the speakers cut out abruptly, leaving a ringing silence that was heavier than the noise. Down in the canyon of wet concrete, Dominic spun around, wild-eyed and panting like a cornered animal. The calculated businessman was gone. In his place was a creature of pure paranoia. He looked at the darkness surrounding us. Then he looked at Beatrice, standing shivering in the rain. His logic fractured. He could not accept that an old warehouse manager had done this to him. In his twisted mind, there was only one person who knew his schedule. One person who had been close enough to betray him. He lunged at her. It was a violent, jerky motion. He grabbed a handful of her wet hair and yanked her head back. I watched from the tower, my hands gripping the controls until the plastic creaked. I saw his mouth moving, screaming words that were lost to the wind, but his body language screamed betrayal. He shoved her back against the grill of the truck, pinning her there with his body weight. Then I saw the flash of metal. He reached into the waistband of his trousers and pulled out a chrome-plated automatic. It was a flashy weapon, a gangster's toy, but at this range, it was lethal. He pressed the barrel right against the center of her forehead. Beatrice froze. Her hands went up in a pathetic defensive gesture, trembling uncontrollably. She was staring into the eyes of the man she had planned to marry and seeing only her executioner. "You did this," he screamed, his voice finally carrying up to me over the storm. "You are wearing a wire, aren't you? Who are you working for, Beatrice? Is it the feds? Did you cut a deal to save yourself?" He was unraveling. The recording had broken his reality. He was convinced she had been playing him the whole time, just as he had played her. He racked the slide of the pistol, a sound that was sharp and mechanical. "Tell me the truth," he roared, shaking her so hard her head snapped back. Tell me, or I will paint this truck with your brains right now." Beatrice was sobbing, shaking her head desperately. "Dominic, please," she begged, the water running down her face, mixing with her tears. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I love you. Why are you doing this?" Love. He spat the word out like poison. "There is no love in this world, Beatrice. There is only leverage, and you just lost yours. You think you can trap me? You think you can sell me out to the DEA and walk away with my money?" He thumbed the hammer back. I watched through the night vision scope. The green reticle settled on his shoulder. My finger hovered over the crane control joystick. I had pushed him to the breaking point, and now he had snapped. He was not going to arrest her or leave her. He was going to kill her, to silence the only witness he thought existed. The psychological warfare phase was over. The time for games had passed. He had drawn a weapon on my daughter, and in doing so, he had signed his own death warrant. I took a deep breath, steadying my heart rate. It was time to introduce him to the heavy machinery. My hand hovered over the master lighting control panel, not trembling, not hesitating. Below me, in the rain-soaked canyon of steel, Dominic held the gun to my daughter's head, believing that the darkness would cover his sin. He thought he was a predator operating in the shadows, but he did not know that he was standing on a stage I had built specifically for this moment. I did not reach for a weapon to stop him. I did not scream. I simply reached out and flipped the breaker switch for the high-intensity cargo floodlights. The effect was instantaneous and violent. 12,000 watts of halogen light exploded into existence directly above them. It was not just illumination, it was a physical assault. The beam cut through the rain like a solid pillar of white fire, turning the night into a blinding, overexposed day. Dominic screamed, flinching as if he had been physically struck. He staggered back, throwing his free arm up to shield his eyes from the searing glare. For a second, he was totally blinded, his pupils unable to contract fast enough to handle the sudden supernova I had dropped on him. He lowered the gun instinctively, trying to orient himself, but there was nowhere to look. The light was everywhere, reflecting off the wet concrete and the shiny metal of the containers. He was a cockroach caught on a kitchen floor. When the lights flick on, exposed and vulnerable. But the light was not the weapon. The light was just the delivery system for the truth. Mounted on the underside of the crane cabin, directly next to the floodlights, was a gyroscopic surveillance camera with a telephoto lens. I had patched the feed through a secure fiber optic line straight to the encrypted server I had shared with Agent Holloway. Inside a conference room at the federal building 20 miles away, a team of federal agents and prosecutors were watching a 60-inch monitor in real time. They saw everything. The crystal-clear, high-definition feed showed every detail. They saw the serial number on the chrome pistol. They saw the dilation of Dominic's pupils. They saw the undeniable intent to kill etched on his face. This was no longer a domestic dispute or a he-said, she-said situation. This was a felony in progress, captured in 4K resolution. I looked at the monitor in my booth, ensuring the framing was perfect. Smile for the camera, Dominic. You are currently broadcasting to the entire Department of Justice. I watched him spin in circles, squinting against the pain in his eyes. He looked up at the tower, realizing finally that he was not alone. He saw the camera lens focusing on him like the unblinking eye of God. He realized with a sick, sinking feeling that every threat he had made every time he raised that gun, he was digging his own grave. I tapped the screen on my phone, sending a single confirmation code to Holloway. The evidence package was complete. The jury would not need to deliberate. They would just need to press play. Dominic lowered the gun slightly, looking around for an exit, but the light trapped him in a circle of white-hot exposure. There was no running from this. The whole world was watching. The sound tore through the night air, shattering the stalemate in the concrete canyon. It began as a low wail and quickly escalated into a piercing shriek that bounced off the steel containers, creating a disorienting echo chamber. From my control tower, I watched the scene unfold with the detached precision of a puppeteer. I had triggered the port's emergency alarm system, but I had modified the frequency to mimic the approaching sirens of a dozen police cruisers. To Dominic, standing exposed in the blinding floodlights, it must have sounded like the entire precinct was descending on him. He froze. The gun in his hand wavered. His head snapped toward the entrance of the alleyway, his eyes wide with panic. The logic of the predator collapsed, instantly replaced by the frantic instinct of the prey. He looked at Beatrice, who was huddled on the wet ground, sobbing. For a split second, I saw him calculate the odds. He could grab her, use her as a shield, and try to negotiate. But that would slow him down. That would tether him to the crime. I saw the exact moment he decided to abandon her. He sneered, a look of pure disgust twisting his features. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't offer an apology. He simply turned his back on the woman he had promised to marry and sprinted away. He ran back toward the entrance, where his Mercedes G-Wagon was parked, abandoning the slow-moving terminal truck. He was fast, fueled by adrenaline and the terror of imminent capture. He scrambled into the driver's seat of his luxury SUV, the engine roaring to life with a guttural growl that competed with the storm. Beatrice watched him go. She sat in the mud and the rain, watching the taillights of her fiancé's car recede into the distance. She didn't scream for him to come back. She just watched. And in that silence, I knew the spell was finally broken. She saw him for what he was. A coward who would burn the world to save his own skin. I watched Dominic's car fishtail on the slick asphalt as he sped toward the main exit. He blew through the stop signs, his tires kicking up plumes of spray. He thought he was escaping. He thought he was leaving the danger behind him, speeding away from the sirens and the lights. He was driving 80 miles an hour, checking his rearview mirror every 2 seconds, expecting to see flashing lights chasing him. But there were no flashing lights. I leaned back in my chair and turned off the alarm. The silence rushed back into the port, heavy and final. I didn't send the police to the shipyard. I knew a chase on the wet highways would be dangerous. It risked collateral damage. I risked him crashing and dying before he could answer for his crimes. So I had played a different game. I watched the red dots of his taillights disappear onto the interstate on-ramp. "Go ahead, Dominic," I whispered. "Run as fast as you can. Drive like the devil is chasing you." He didn't know that the road he was on didn't lead to freedom. It led straight back to his penthouse. He was racing home to destroy evidence, to pack a bag to grab his passport. He thought he had a head start. He didn't realize that Agent Holloway and a tactical entry team were not at the docks. They were sitting in his lobby, drinking coffee, waiting for him to walk through the front door. He wasn't running away from the trap. He was running directly into it. The morning sun was struggling to break through the heavy gray clouds, but the street in front of the luxury condominium complex was already bright with the strobe effect of red and blue emergency lights. The silence of the exclusive neighborhood had been shattered hours ago. Now the sidewalks were lined with curious neighbors standing in their bathrobes, holding cups of coffee and whispering behind their hands. They were watching the fall of a golden boy, The end of the meticulously curated life Dominic Vance had built on a foundation of lies. I stood at the edge of the police cordon, my hands buried deep in the pockets of my jacket, watching the final act of the play I had written unfold. The heavy oak doors of the building swung open, and a hush fell over the crowd. 2 federal agents in windbreakers emerged first, scanning the perimeter with professional indifference. Between them walked Beatrice. She was not wearing her expensive jewelry or the designer clothes Dominic had bought to dress her up like a trophy. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater. Her hands were cuffed behind her back, and her head was bowed low. To the neighbors and the news cameras zooming in from down the block, it looked like the walk of shame of a criminal mastermind caught red-handed. I felt a sharp pang in my chest seeing my little girl in handcuffs, even though I knew it was necessary. This was not an arrest. It was an extraction. The handcuffs were a prop designed to sell the narrative that Dominic needed to believe for just a few minutes longer. Beatrice was being moved into protective custody. Her testimony already secured her safety, guaranteed by the deal I had brokered with Holloway. She looked up for a split second, scanning the crowd until her eyes met mine. She didn't smile, but she gave a nearly imperceptible nod. She was brave. She was stronger than Dominic had ever given her credit for. Then the man of the hour appeared. Dominic stood in the doorway, flanked by a uniformed officer. He was not in handcuffs. He was not being dragged out. He was standing tall, wearing a look of practiced somberness that made my stomach turn. He looked like the grieving victim, the stunned boyfriend who had just discovered his fiancée's dark secret. He shook his head sadly as they loaded Beatrice into the back of an unmarked black sedan. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I knew exactly what was inside. It was the customs release form, the chemical analysis, and the forged bill of lading. The papers that had my signature and Beatrice's name all over them. He handed the envelope to the lead agent on the scene with a look of righteous cooperation. I could see his lips moving, even from this distance. He was probably saying something about how heartbroken he was, about how he never suspected a thing, about how he just wanted to help the investigation. The agent took the envelope and nodded solemnly. Dominic patted the agent on the shoulder, a gesture of camaraderie that reeked of arrogance. He turned back toward the crowd, and for a brief moment, his eyes locked onto me standing behind the yellow tape. A slow smirk spread across his face. It was a cold, triumphant smile. He raised his eyebrows slightly, as if to say, "I told you so, old man." He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully framed my daughter and walked away clean with the money and his freedom. He had no idea that the agent he just handed the papers to was already wearing a wire that was recording his final attempt to obstruct justice. He didn't know that the envelope didn't prove his innocence. It proved his access. He was smiling at his own executioner. The smile on Dominic's face was still lingering, a ghost of his arrogance, as a heavy hand clamped down on his shoulder. It was not the polite touch of an officer escorting a witness. It was the iron grip of a man who had waited years for this moment. I watched as Sergeant Kowalski stepped out from behind the wall of uniformed police. He was not wearing his stained warehouse vest or holding a chipped coffee mug. He was in his full dress uniform, the gold stripes on his sleeves gleaming in the dull light, and the badge on his chest polished to a mirror shine. He looked like a mountain of blue wool and brass standing over a man who suddenly looked very small. Dominic tried to shrug the hand off, his expression shifting from smugness to annoyance. "Excuse me, officer," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I think there has been a mistake. I am the one who called you. I am the victim here. He tried to turn away, to walk back into the lobby as if the conversation was over. But Kowalski did not let go. Instead, he twisted Dominic's arm behind his back with a fluid, practiced motion that forced Dominic to bend forward at the waist with a sharp cry of pain. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut cut through the morning air like a whip crack. Click, click, click. The neighbors stopped whispering. The birds seemed to stop singing. The only sound was Dominic's heavy breathing and the rustle of his expensive suit jacket as he struggled uselessly against the restraints. Kowalski leaned in close, his face inches from Dominic's ear. "Dominic Vance, you are under arrest," he boomed, his voice deep and resonant, carrying all the way to where I stood on the sidewalk. "You are being charged with conspiracy to distribute Schedule I narcotics, money laundering in the first degree, and the attempted murder of a federal witness." Dominic began to thrash, his face contorted with a mixture of shock and fury. He looked like a child who had been told no for the first time in his life. "You are crazy!" he screamed, spitting the words out. "You have nothing on me. I have the documents. She signed them. Beatrice is the importer. I am just an investor. You are arresting the wrong man. I will sue this department into the ground. I want to see the evidence. Show me one piece of proof that links me to that container." He was desperate, clinging to the paper shield he had constructed. He truly believed that his forged signatures and shell companies were enough to protect him. He thought the law was a game of technicalities that he had already won. He was screaming for evidence, demanding it as if its absence would set him free. I watched him struggle, the veins in his neck bulging, and I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. He wanted proof. He wanted to know why his perfect plan had failed. He had no idea that the proof wasn't just in a file folder. It was standing right in front of him, wearing a badge, and it was standing on the sidewalk, watching him with tired old eyes. Kowalski tightened his grip, forcing Dominic to look at him. "You want evidence?" Dominic Kowalski said calmly. "We have more than evidence. We have a broadcast." The heavy black armored SUV rolled through the police barricade, parting the sea of uniformed officers like a shark moving through a school of fish. It came to a stop right in front of where Kowalski was holding Dominic. The tint on the windows was pitch black, reflecting the flashing lights and the stunned faces of the neighbors. The passenger door opened with a solid, heavy thunk. I stepped out onto the pavement, but I was not the man Dominic remembered. Gone was the stained canvas jacket and the worn-out work boots. Gone was the stooped posture of the tired dock worker who shuffled his feet and mumbled about retirement. I was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that I had not taken out of the garment bag in 15 years. It was tailored to hide a shoulder holster and cut to allow for sudden movement. My spine was straight, my shoulders were squared, and I moved with the fluid, predatory grace of a man who had spent 3 decades hunting people much more dangerous than a Seattle social climber. I adjusted my cuffs and buttoned my jacket, walking toward them with a stride that commanded silence. The police officers who had been holding the line stepped back instinctively, recognizing authority when they saw it. I walked past the gaping neighbors and the clicking cameras, my eyes locked on Dominic. He stopped struggling against Kowalski's grip. His mouth hung open slightly, and his eyes darted up and down my frame, trying to reconcile the image of the bumbling old father-in-law with the cold professional standing before him. He looked like he was seeing a ghost, a hallucination brought on by stress. I stopped less than a foot away from him. I did not blink. I did not smile. I looked at him with the flat, dead eyes of an interrogator. Dominic stared back, his arrogance finally replaced by a dawning, horrific realization. He saw the way I stood. He saw the way the other cops looked at me. And he knew. He knew that everything he thought he knew about me was a lie. "George," he whispered, his voice trembling. Who are you?" I did not answer him directly. I reached into the breast pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out a small black object. It was the receiver unit for the bug I had planted in his coat. I held it up between us, letting it catch the morning light. It was tiny, harmless looking, just a piece of plastic and wire. But to Dominic, it must have looked like a bomb. I leaned in close so only he could hear me, my voice low and smooth, stripped of the fake stutter I had used for months. "You were so busy listening to yourself talk, Dominic, that you never stopped to check who else was listening. You treated me like furniture. You treated my daughter like a disposable asset. You thought you were the smartest man in the room, but you were just a guest in my house." I tossed the receiver lightly in the air and caught it. "You forgot to turn this off, son-in-law." Dominic's knees buckled. The color drained from his face, leaving him gray and pasty. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The glitching speakers at the port, the lights, the sudden arrival of the police. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't a mistake. It was me. He looked at me with pure terror, finally understanding that the harmless old man he had planned to kill was the one who had just ended his life. Kowalski grinned and tightened his grip, dragging the sobbing, broken man toward the squad car. I watched him go, adjusting my tie. The operation was successful. The target was neutralized. And I had a wedding to cancel. I handed the small black chip to Agent Holloway, who was standing by the open door of the armored SUV. She did not say a word. She simply took a tablet from the tactical vest of the nearest officer and inserted the drive. She tapped the screen twice, patching the audio feed directly into the external speaker system of the command vehicle. The street was already quiet, but as the speakers crackled to life, a hush fell over the neighborhood that was so profound it felt like the air had been sucked out of the world. Even the wind seemed to stop to listen. Static hissed for a second, a sharp digital scratch that made Dominic flinch. Then came the sound. It was crystal clear, high-definition audio, processed to remove background noise and isolate the vocal frequencies. It was the sound of ice clinking against a glass, followed by a long, satisfied sigh. It was the sound of a man relaxing in his castle, believing he was untouchable. The voice that floated out over the manicured lawns and parked police cars was unmistakable. It was Dominic. But it was not the frantic, screaming Dominic who was currently hyperventilating in Kowalski's grip. It was the smooth, arrogant Dominic from the night before. "The asset is secured," the recording played. "The old man is terrified. He signed the release forms. I have the girl wrapped around my finger." Dominic let out a strangled noise, a pathetic whimper of protest. "Turn it off," he begged, his voice cracking. "That is out of context. You can't play that. That is illegal." Kowalski just tightened his grip, forcing Dominic to listen. The recording continued, relentless and cruel. "She is in love. She will do whatever I tell her. But once the shipment clears, she becomes a liability. Dispose of her. Make it look like an overdose." The neighbors gasped. I saw a woman in a bathrobe cover her mouth with her hand. The facade was gone. The charming neighbor who brought wine to block parties was revealed as a monster who planned the murder of his own fiancée. Dominic hung his head, realizing that his social standing was evaporating along with his freedom. But I was not done. I nodded to Holloway, and she swiped to the next file. This was the one that would bury him. This was the one that turned a murder charge into a federal RICO case. The audio shifted. It was the sound of typing, followed by Dominic reading numbers aloud. Account number 774 Bravo Zulu. Bank of Geneva. Routing code 991. Transfer the initial $5 million to the holding shell in the Caymans. Dominic's legs gave out. If Kowalski hadn't been holding him up, he would have collapsed onto the pavement. He knew what those numbers meant. They were the keys to the kingdom. They were the direct link to the money laundering operation. He had just heard himself reciting the digital trail that led straight to the illegal funds. There was no defense against this. No lawyer in the world could argue that his own voice reading secret bank account numbers was a coincidence. Then came the final nail in the coffin. The recording played the voice of the man on the other end of the line, the gravelly, distorted voice of the cartel contact. "And tell El Patron that the Seattle route is open." Dominic screamed. It was a raw, primal sound of pure terror. "No!" he shrieked, thrashing wildly. "Turn it off! You are killing me! They will hear this! You can't play that name!" He wasn't afraid of the police anymore. He was afraid of the people he worked for. By playing that recording in public, I had just broadcast his betrayal to the world. I had outed him as the weak link who let the operation get compromised. I looked at him, his face gray and sweating, his eyes rolling back in his head. He was hyperventilating, gasping for air as if he was drowning. He looked at me pleadingly, begging for mercy. But I just stared back. "You did this to yourself, Dominic," I said, my voice cutting through his panic. "You wanted to be a big player. You wanted to swim with the sharks. Well, the sharks are hungry, and you just started bleeding in the water." He slumped forward, completely broken. He sobbed openly, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the snot running from his nose. He was a ruin of a man. The recording ended, leaving only the echo of his crimes hanging in the morning air. Holloway closed the laptop. Kowalski hauled Dominic up by his arm, dragging his dead weight toward the cruiser. He didn't fight back. He didn't argue. He was a hollow shell, a man who had heard his own eulogy and knew that the life he lived was over. The game was finished, and the house had collected every single chip. The Pacific Ocean stretched out before us in a sheet of endless shimmering blue, a stark contrast to the gray industrial rain that had defined my life for so long. It had been 6 months since the sirens wailed at the condominium complex. 6 months of depositions, trials, and headlines. But today there were no lawyers. There were no cameras. There was just the rhythmic creaking of the wooden pier and the gentle slap of water against the pilings. I sat on my folding canvas chair, a hat pulled low over my eyes, watching the tip of my fishing rod bob in the gentle swell. Beatrice sat next to me. She looked different. The hollow, haunted look in her eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet resilience. She had cut her hair short, severing the last physical link to the doll Dominic had tried to mold her into. She was baiting her own hook, threading the worm with steady hands. She wasn't the fragile girl who needed saving anymore. She was a survivor, learning to navigate the world on her own terms. She cast her line out, the sinker splashing softly into the surf. She looked over at me and smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. For the first time in years, she looked free. Dominic was thousands of miles away, rotting in a federal supermax facility in Colorado. The courts had been merciless. The recording of him ordering a hit on a federal witness, combined with the financial data, had earned him 3 consecutive life sentences. He would never see the ocean again. He would never drink wine or wear Italian silk. He was just a number now, erased from the world he so desperately wanted to own. I reached into the pocket of my windbreaker. My fingers closed around a small, cold object. It was the modified earpiece, the tiny black receiver that I had used to listen to the sins of a monster. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than lead. It was a relic of a life I was ready to leave behind. I pulled it out, holding it up to the sunlight. It looked so insignificant, just a piece of plastic and wire. But it had saved my daughter's life. I looked at Beatrice. She saw what I was holding. She didn't say anything. She just nodded slowly, giving me permission to let go. I took a deep breath, inhaling the salt air. I didn't need to listen to the shadows anymore. I stood up and walked to the edge of the pier. I pulled my arm back and threw the device as hard as I could. It arced through the air, spinning in the sunlight before vanishing into the white foam of the breaking waves. It was gone, swallowed by the tide, to be buried in the sand forever. I watched the spot where it landed, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was carrying. I sat back down and picked up my rod. The world was quiet, but it wasn't the silence of secrets. It was the silence of peace. I closed my eyes and listened. I didn't hear static. I didn't hear conspiracies or lies. For 40 years, I spent my life tuning in to the hidden channels of the world, waiting for the bad news to drop. I thought I needed to hear everything to be safe. But I was wrong. The most dangerous frequency isn't a radio wave or a wiretap. It is the sweet sound of a lie, told by someone you trust. It is the silence of a father who is too afraid to speak up. That noise is gone now. The static has finally cleared. Now when I close my eyes, I don't hear the enemy. I can finally hear the sound of the real ocean. And it is beautiful. The most profound lesson we learn from George is that we should never mistake silence for ignorance or kindness for weakness. Dominic fell because he judged a book by its worn cover, assuming that an old dock worker was helpless against his sophisticated lies. But true strength does not need to shout to be effective. It listens, it observes, and when necessary, it strikes with precision. We also learn that the people who truly love us will never ask us to compromise our safety or our soul for their gain. Real love protects. It does not exploit. In a world full of noise, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply listen to the truth that is hiding in plain sight. If you enjoyed this story of calculated justice and redemption, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling tales where the underdog takes back control.